Guys, this is Beaker. I wanted to make a video about the kind of up and coming slash already on PTR and soon will be on live in about a week from now. PvP changes for season 2. First of all, the New World League event has been really fun. Just want to state that as a beginning thing, and there is a forum now that I'll link in the description for if you did not get into the event and you want to participate in some of the side events that are happening into it. So not the main PvP portion, but things like OPR, crafting, kind of playing with the PTR and playing with all those players. That is open now, and there are a limited amount of keys, so make sure to get your applications in as soon as you can if you want to be in the event. And then second of all, let's talk about this like kind of balance update. It is noteworthy that the notes from what the actual balance of power that David put out are not publicly available to my knowledge at the moment, but those changes have been made on the PTR and you could feel them right away. They're also not updated in the New World database portion right now, so that's something that you can't really use as a source at the moment, but I imagine will be there soon. The actual changes that were made, Incinerate got a stagger. Before it had got like a big damage buff on the last patch, now it has a stagger built into it. This just makes Incinerate a little bit better in terms of like a util oriented perk. So you could think of it as like maybe people are collapsing on you as a fire staff, you use the Incinerate, you stagger them, you combo that into an ability or something along those lines. The problem is stagger doesn't work versus targets with grit, and basically every single melee in the game has grit. This is the interesting part I think about this is Incinerate is like a soft counter to the current Greatsword meta where people are playing Greatsword not for the heavy attacks, but instead for the light attacks and for the abilities themselves, because Greatsword is the only weapon in the game that is basically able to counter Ice Gauntlet, and Ice Gauntlet has been the meta and will forever continue to be the meta as long as Ice Shower is not tuned back. That being said, I don't expect the Ice Shower to be significantly tuned back because it's been something that has not been looked at as of recent. But if I were the devs kind of like thinking about something that probably to shake up the PvP scene, I'd say Ice Shower itself could probably be reduced in duration almost half, and it would still be meta and it would still be played all the time. It is that strong of an ability, and it is extremely oppressive since it gives your team haste, and it basically makes it so the other team has to waste 2 dodges to get through it, effectively making it so that Ice Shower counters any sort of movement-based mechanics, which easily sets up for detonate pushes, which is where you see this like kind of detonate Ice Shower centric point meta where everyone's trying to blow up the point team, surrounding the point team with Ice Showers, there's nowhere to go, and then everyone kind of gets blown up and dies. The counter to this is you go Greatsword, you get Relentless Rush, and then you get out of that clump before it actually explodes. And there's not much of another counter in the game. Every other ability that's an escape ability will get stuck by the actual and like will not be able to get past the actual Ice Shower. But Greatsword's Relentless Rush is able to, which makes it so that Greatsword is kind of inherently played a lot because Ice Shower is run on IG. Well, obviously, Ice Shower is run on like IGVG. It's run on IGBB, and it's like in general just very present in and around the point as a space controlling ability. There's no other ability in the game that can control space as well as it can, and Greatsword is like a really easy way to soft counter that. So they're also looking at this. They've noticed that Greatsword is being played a lot, and they're tuning down the base damage of Greatsword. But I think the bigger thing here is why is Greatsword being played? Greatsword is being played so much because Ice Shower is incredibly broken. It will just because of the way that it kind of manipulates stamina from a PvP perspective. Like to give reference to this, Lengard the other day, like to give an anecdotal reference, he went through my Ice Shower, right? He uses 2 dodges. That's 100 stamina because he isn't heavy. I I have Great Sword on at the time. I use Steadfast Strike. I pull him back through the Ice Shower to the other side. He dodges again and he's stammed out and he still hasn't gotten through the Ice Shower. Ice Shower is so inherently meta that people are like layering them on top of each other. You're just literally not able to escape. You're not really able to use abilities super effectively in the Ice Shower, and that's setting up everyone to be clumped up together and leading to very big kind of wipes and kind of crashes on point. So I don't know what you could do to really tune that down, but I think that ability is sleeper OP and probably needs to be looked at in the future. The other things that they have given is they've given Flurry Grit, which will help it a bit from a PvP perspective. The main problem with kind of Flurry or like Rapier or Blood Tree from a PvP perspective is anytime you go into a war situation, people have a cleanse spot and a 30-second cooldown. So if you're trying to stack bleeds, which this tree kind of plays for, then you're just effectively can be countered by someone pressing that button whenever they want, which basically makes it so that Rapier Bleed Tree is only viable in the 3v3 or OPR perspective, which is fine, because people still run Flurry and Finish for the stagger, but it's not ever going to be above like a B tier build basically because of that. Even with the grit, like it helps a bit, but I don't expect this to really take off, just because of the fact that this whole tree kind of gets countered by cleanse plots for the most part. Life Staff got some really, really, really big buffs that I want to talk about more at the end. But Splash of Light, it keeps the range that it had before, and they got a healing buff. And the noteworthy thing about Splash of Light is the priorities that it strips are basically the things that you want it to strip first. So it's going to try to strip the roots first, and then I believe it goes for either like kind of exhaustive based effects, or it goes for disease. I forget which after that, but it's basically ideal strip order, and then after that it's like rend or something along those lines. So it's like pretty ideal from a like kind of removing buffs aspect, which is one of the main reasons why it's run right now. And overall, I think Splash of Light is going to be in a spot where it's run by almost every single healer after this buff. It was already being run a lot because of what it prowled in terms of stripping, but I think it will definitely be played almost everywhere. Orb of Protection also got a very, very big buff where this 10% got increased to a 20%. I'll go why into in the end where that is a really, really big deal. In terms of other things, bow got some interesting buffs. They're kind of buffing this left tree. A lot of the bows, as of recent, have been going like a left tree that didn't really make a ton of sense with the PTR, just to get to this kind of ultimate that's there. I'm on the wrong patch, so the ultimate is wrong. But everyone kind of wants evasive tactics, and if you try to go to evasive tactics and you don't pick up rain of arrows, you don't pick up poison shot, you end up with this really weird tree that people were trying on the PTR, where they're literally taking 1 point into evade and not running the actual ability itself, and then taking abilities on the right tree because evasive tactics is that good of an ability. By buffing poison shot and buffing rain of arrows, I think it makes it in an interesting spot where maybe you do have some bows that kind of go for an AoE oriented damage left tree. The other thing that was interesting that they did is they increased the poison shots like tick rate, not the actual damage. This is a really big buff because this basically means that you're going to get ult charge faster from using poison shot because it's going to be ticking faster, and those ticks tend to lead to ult charge in the code in the back end, which will basically mean that you get your heart rune off faster, you can cast more heart runes. And then this is going to be basically the new I could spam my heart rune ability like every a 15 to 20-second build, I imagine, when it comes down to it, which puts Bo in a very interesting spot where you have this dichotomy of like, do you want to go for single target damage, which has been considerably nerfed over and over and over again, which seems to be more headshot based as of recent, but I don't think headshots are super consistent, so that's like the problem there. Or do you want to go for this kind of left tree? The other thing that's kind of weird too with this tree before is when this was leg shot, like where you would aim for the legs. For some reason in New World, the leg oriented hitbox kind of is easier to hit than like the upper half of like your body hitbox. Like it extends underground a little bit somehow. I'm not exactly sure how this works, but like if you actually play around with the hitboxes and see where you can hit people, it is generally easier to shoot people with the leg shot and below. So now it's going to be basically that bows have to hit a smaller target, and you're going for headshots now if you want to do a lot of damage as a single target bow. So I think the single target bow aspect has gotten heavily nerfed, and people are basically going to try to switch back from bow back over to musket, and musket now is kind of like a medium range oriented build. So I think this is like honestly like a pretty awesome balance change because now you have bow in a spot where it's not going to be super oppressive anymore just due to the perk tree that is involved, and then you have musket in a spot where it is viable as like kind of that medium to long range DPS and is no longer maybe outclassed by bow, because for bows to go for that single target tree they have to sacrifice so much. The other thing that they've also made a change with the bow is they've sped up the rain of arrows speed for it to actually hit the ground. A while ago, Rain of Arrows had a really slow speed, and it was actually really good because it had that slow speed where you would cast Rain of Arrows into a heavy attack in the pen shot, and that would basically itself it had the ability to one-shot points. They've gotten rid of that, and then now they're upping the Rain of Arrows damage. The Rain of Arrows is more kind of like as a Pillar of Fire oriented ability. I think this still puts Rain of Arrows in a really good spot because all this stuff causes bleed, so you're going to be ticking a lot with this left tree. Basically means you're going to get a ton of ults off. You're going to be able to pad your heart out, and honestly, it might actually be really underrated and kind of low-key pretty decent next patch. So I'm excited to see where that develops. The new heart rune got a damage upgrade, so it got a base like I believe it was 15% damage upgrade, which is like update to its damage. It definitely hits harder than it did before. I wouldn't say this ult really hits hard in general. The main thing that's like interesting from it, I think, is the brutal one, because the brutal one does like extra damage on top of like the base damage. So that one just like it actually hits like decently hard now, but the other ones I don't think hit nearly as hard. It seems like it could be nichely viable. I don't see it being like a hard meta ultimate, but I could see it being used by ranged players now to kind of collapse on healers. It is a little bit easier to get into the ultimate, but the actual like getting into the ultimate into the cast still feels a little bit too clunky for me to be considering it as someone that's like in a melee oriented build. But from a ranged to like close ranged oriented build, I think this ult is completely viable. SNS also got a nerf. SNS Opportunist got nerfed, so that it only is going to apply to the actual abilities itself, so it won't apply off your basic attacks anymore. This I think makes sense because SNS was being played a lot because you could run 6 damage oriented perks, which is just inherently very good on a lot of weapons, and it's just honestly a very strong weapon in general right now, especially with the buffs. So I think this change made sense, but I don't see SNS being affected by a ton, to be honest. And then Greatsword, as I mentioned before, also got a damage nerf. I think this is absolutely necessary, but I don't think Greatsword is the main problem. I think the main problem is honestly Ice Gauntlet, but Greatsword kind of is being played because Ice Gauntlet can't counter Greatsword in a way if you play off it right. I expect this meta, like the dev said, to be like a little bit more melee centric for the near future. The main thing that's been meta as of recent that EU has been pushing, that NA has been copying, is people do Greatsword Firestaff duo groups, so that Firestaffs are hitting directly on top of where a Greatsword is playing. That alone can basically one-shot most builds, and then you can combo that with some other builds like a bow or a musket for kind of finishing potential. And that kind of oriented setup where it's like a smaller group of 2 to 3, it's sort of like the new roamer meta. Like it's always been Great Axe Warhammer, and IGVG is kind of like the 3-man class that dominates every aspect in PvP. Now there's kind of this secondary class that's kind of coming about, or secondary group that's coming about, where people go great swords, they go fire staffs, and then those two alone can control space really well and nuke targets, and just in general are a very, very flexible, solid group to slot. So I'm excited to see how that turns out. It has definitely dominated on EU. It's starting to come over to NA as a potential meta shift. So that's what I would expect in the near future. Overall, very, very good changes. Highly recommend looking at the dev video. David's really, really good with these, and it's very enlightening in terms of his philosophy, and he's made a lot of like really good changes in the last 2 to 3 months, and I'm very happy that he is doing these balance of power updates and frequent updates to the PvP scene. It's made the scene a lot less stale than it was before, and I'm starting to see players come back because of it, and that is really cool. Hey guys, this is Mikro. I almost forgot to talk about the new Fortify change and why Orbit Protection will probably be meta from a healer perspective for the near future. If you look at what Orbit Protection was in the past patch, Orbit Protection provided about a 5% heal best case situation, but when you actually take into account the buffs it gives to Invigorated Punishment, Orbit Protection effectively did nothing for most builds because Orbit Protection provides a heal and a fortify. Both those heals and fortifies count as buffs, which basically made it so Orbit Protection wasn't effectively doing anything. With the recent patch, this effect got doubled, which basically means that Orbit Protection is once again pretty good from a medium and heavy class perspective. In cases where people aren't applying ability damage to Orbit Protection, is a very strong buff now for both medium and heavy classes. For light classes itself, it's not an incredibly good buff, but it is a solid choice to run as well. And I'll see you guys later.